the next four speakers, first of all, is going to be Alison Noble. She's the provost at Fresno Pacific University. Her academic discipline is chemistry. She traveled from Fresno to Massachusetts, to Maine, to Indianapolis, to here. So she gets some sort of prize. Next speaker will be Jeffrey Tabone. He's Director of Programs and Student Formation in the John Wesley Honors College at Indiana Wesleyan University. His specific academic interest is faith and learning, especially in the general curriculum. And if I remember right, you were recently ordained as an Episcopal priest. Anglican priest, let's get that right. Sorry about that. So Jeffrey is going to be our second respondent. Our third respondent is Kent Eilers. He's here at Huntington University, professor of theology. He's also the chair of our Humanities and Christian Thought division. He's co-editor of a theology series published by Baker Academic, and I think if I remember right, you just got the proof copy of the latest edition yesterday, so you got work to do. And then the fourth presenter is Kimberly Fenstermacher, who's Dean of the School of Nursing at Palm Beach Atlantic. She's also a neonatal nurse practitioner, and distinctive about her is she's retiring next week and returning home to Pennsylvania. So of all people, I think congratulations are most in order maybe to Kim. So we're going to start with Alison, and then each presenter will just follow without further introduction. You got that.
Thanks so much, Luke, and thank you, President Pepper, for the invitation to be here, and Jake and Rhonda for writing such a wonderful text for us to be here and talk about today. It's great to be here. I'm grateful to be here. Before Fresno Pacific, I was at Messiah for about 14 years and had the privilege of working with Rob and Jake and Rhonda and Kim Fenstermacher in previous years. So I didn't get to sit in a class with Jake and Rhonda, but now I feel like I've had that experience in brief. So what you're going to hear from me is a little bit of a mashup. They asked me to talk about attentiveness. I'm a chemist turned provost. I feel like I used to be able to be more attentive, and now I'm just distracted all the time. You're going to hear from me a mashup of the book, some other thinkers, my own thoughts, and a little bit of chemistry. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but I think we'll just begin. So to begin, let's first turn our attention to what we mean by attentiveness. We know it when we see it. We know it when we experience it. And I would argue that attentive actually comes to us naturally, though admittedly to different degrees, at different times, and to different people, which I suppose is the point of having 4 pathways. As I prepared my talk, I found myself occasionally stepping on the toes of the other pathways, particularly contemplation, so I'm going to apologize in advance to my colleagues who will come next if I say some things that you're like, hey, wait a minute, that was mine. So as a chemistry professor, one of the things I was charged with teaching to all incoming first-year chemistry students was the scientific method. How boring, you say. Well, like most subjects, it can be made incredibly boring by a professor determined to make it that way, or by someone who is simply not paying enough attention. It turns out, though, that the scientific method is basically an adult reformulation of what I would say kids do anyway. So, here is how I like to teach the scientific method. This is my daughter, Annalie. She is 20 now, so doesn't look anything quite like this, maybe a little bit, but not too much. And I would say this about kids. They're curious, they pay attention, they explore, they communicate, and they try again. Somehow, we manage to pound this out of most kids by the time they get to middle school, if not sooner. And by the time they're college freshmen and showed up in my classroom, we have to re-teach it to them, sometimes in boring ways, out of science textbooks. College freshmen have been well trained to focus on the right answer and to give their attention to what has the most efficient payoff. They are looking for accuracy, efficiency, and outcomes. And of course, the director of assessment always wants to hear about our outcomes also. They have essentially been trained out of attentiveness. So if we've been trained out of it, well, then what is it? The book, Taking Care of Youth and the Generations by Bernard Stiegler, he reminds us that the word attentiveness has as its root the French word attendre, which means to wait. More than simply waiting, attentiveness is described by Stiegler as long waiting, infinite waiting on the disclosure of the long webs of connectedness that are in the object. These long webs mirror the rich long webs of connectedness that are in you. Attentiveness is slow, akin to what Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman describes as slow thinking in his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. Attentiveness is focused and curious and open. It's not out to prove something. So again, I would describe attentiveness in the positive because we often think about attentiveness in the negative, and I would argue that we think about it that way because we are also distracted most of the time. We think much more about distraction than attention. Attention is slow, focused, curious, and open. Now that we have a sense of what it is, in a moment we're going to take a pause and for you to remember a time that you were deeply attentive. But as an example to get you started, because you've all been listening for quite a while, as an example to get you started, I'm going to tell a little story. I was a chemistry major in college, and my chemistry problem sets were long. They were challenging, and personally I thought they were engaging and fascinating. One evening, I was working on a particularly challenging assignment, and my roommate Janelle came back into the room. I was so focused that I didn't hear her come in. I didn't even hear her when she spoke directly to me from a few feet away. Feeling ignored, because she was being ignored, disrespected and angry, Janelle threw a textbook down with a loud bang. I apologized, pleading that I had not heard her. She may or may not have called me a liar because she was in disbelief. But my chemistry homework had my full attention. All right, so there's an example. Several of the presenters are going to be using Menti throughout the morning. If you are not familiar with Menti, that's okay. This is a moment where even the person giving the talk on attentiveness is going to say, please pull out your phone. I know, terrible advice. But pull out your phone because we're going to do a little Menti exercise, I hope. Well, that one didn't work out, but I have another one, so hopefully this next one's going to work. I would like you to, all right, so I may need to toggle over to, when you open that, is it showing something that says chaos spelled out in Scrabble letters? Okay, go ahead with that one, and then I'll have to manually advance it. So a little bit of feedback. What most commonly distracts you? I like that inner thoughts was also my response to this, inner thoughts. Maybe that'll be a good lead-in for the contemplation folk, I don't know. But we see here that we're distracted by noise, inner thoughts, multitasking right up there as well. All right, so that was just a short trial. The next one for Menti, which, let's see, does it advance in your Menti? Did it work? All right. So go ahead, this one's open-ended. I'm just gonna give us about 60 seconds for you to think about a time that you were really attending to something. We'll be gathering these as open-ended. We won't have time to go through them during this 30-minute session, but we'll have some feedback at some point. All right. They don't show up when I'm doing presentation mode, but if I take it off of presentation mode, I can see them. So here's a couple of the responses that you've given. Watching a movie, weeding the garden, another engrossed in a good movie, walking in the woods, when something has a deadline, driving in the car and arriving home not remembering the drive. When I'm reading, I can tune out what's around me. Writing my paper for this presentation, academic writing, creating curriculum, reading a book and blocking my husband trying to talk to me, problem solving an art project, reading books, answering emails, reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, so focused I could not hear my friends who were also at the table talking to me. Practicing an instrument, thinking while driving, acting on stage, when planting flowers in my flower garden, reading a book, playing with G.I. Joe figures as a child, practicing the piano, lost in the making of music, not just the emotion, but the notes, technique, and dynamics. When my phone died and was no longer a distraction. Completing a new business case to use with students in class. I got lost in Googling info and crunching the numbers. I've missed many turns and probably a few stop signs while deep in conversation in the car. All right. So it sounds to me like everybody's on the pathway of attentiveness. I guess I can just stop and... Those are great examples. Okay. All right. We'll come back to Menti later, but for now, we're going to move ahead and talk about two postures of attention. In the book from the Jacobsons, they talk about these two postures of attention for violence and attention for reverence. So I'm going to talk about those two things just a little bit, and then also a little bit of history. I can't help myself, I'm a context person. All right. There are different kinds of attentiveness, or better put, there are different purposes to or postures of attentiveness. The text draws out the difference by comparing Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring, which was the book that awakened the country to the deadly effects of DDT on ecosystems, and she also serves as the exemplar of attentiveness as pilgrimage thinking, and contrasts this with Sir Francis Bacon, who considered the natural world such that it had to be, quote, poked, prodded, and sometimes brutalized into revealing its mysteries. In contrast to Bacon, Rachel Carson exemplifies a scientific approach that is grounded in an unqualified sense of reverence for life, a quote, deep, quasi-mystical sense of respect and reverence for the natural world that proceeds with a sense of wonder and awe. Historian of science, Professor D. Graham Burnett at Princeton University studies the history of human attention. I learned in preparing for this presentation that the study of human attention began in earnest in the late 19th century and continued through the 20th century. So I was fascinated that the study of human attention didn't actually start until the late 19th century, because I'm embedded in the modern day, in our modern culture and context. It didn't occur to me that the study of attention wouldn't be something that people thought about 400 years ago. But this is a fairly recent thing that's been studied. Interestingly, and in my opinion, not coincidentally, the timing for the study of attention aligns with the shift outlined in the Jacobson's text from epistemological universalism to cognitive pluralism. That makes sense to me. Epistemological universalism and that shift to pluralism was when people recognized that we don't all have the same inner world. People were experiencing things differently. And so this is the same time period when we started to study attention. The very concept of attention emerges when people began to realize that their internal worlds are, in fact, not nearly as shared as they had supposed. Since the 1880s, a great deal of research had been done on the subject of attention, and it would be a gross omission on my part to fail to identify that much of the research on attention is funded by companies that want to know how to get it, keep it, and monetize it. We are accosted daily by attempts at our attention, a practice that in one way is fundamental to our survival as a species. After all, who can imagine a baby that does not cry out for the attention of its parent? But in another way is new. The crying baby is not seeking a profit. It is not calculating the ROI from advertising Budweiser protein bars or the latest gambling apps during the Super Bowl. From billboards to social media, we are the subjects of what is called environmental response engineers. These are people who are hired by companies to optimize the stimulus and response, to trigger and target our attention to maximize corporate profit. This is the attention economy, described by Davenport and Beck in their famous book of the same name, The Attention Economy, Understanding the New Currency of Business. Attention is the new currency of business. This kind of attentiveness is better aligned with attentiveness for violence. It is meant to catalyze us from awareness to action, and it drives economic profit. The pace of change and new technologies is racing forward, from the Industrial Revolution to the Human Genome Project to artificial intelligence. And each new technology can bring benefits, but each one also opens new avenues for human exploitation. From the exploitive conditions of early factories to designer babies to the insatiable hunger for water and energy needed to power AI, these, quote, advances bring not only new ways to monetize our labor, but in the case of attention, what we actually give our very selves to. This kind of attention, this use of attention, detracts from our ability to be fully human and is at odds with attentiveness as pilgrimage thinking. It is what the text would categorize as violence and destructive action, diminishing our humanity. It is anger over empathy and outrage over curiosity. So what's the contrast? Attentiveness for reverence is the opposite of a triggering attention economy. Attentiveness is waiting. Simone Weil, a French mystic, labor activist, and social justice martyr of the World War II era, describes attentiveness saying that pure, unmixed attention is prayer. She describes attention as having no easy object or end, by which she intends a negative theology or a theology of absence. God is so beyond that we do not know how to get at God. It requires an attention that is intangible. Attentiveness of this sort is deeply curious. It waits for what it does not yet know. Well, that sounds hard. How do we get to that? Well, I'm going to make it seem, the slide makes it seem like I'm just going to tell you, oh, not so hard. Here it is. Not the case. It is actually hard, and it takes a lot of practice, and I'm not quite sure that any of us actually ever get there, but we can practice and we can get closer, like pilgrims. So here's a key question. What are we all to do to practice attentiveness for reverence in a context that accosts us constantly with attention for violence? What are we all to do to practice attention for reverence in a context that accosts us constantly with attention for violence? I claimed earlier that we are all born with some sense of attentiveness, and I still maintain that, at least in the sense of observation and curiosity. But cultivating attentiveness for Christian pilgrimage requires both practice as well as resistance to our current context. In order to practice, we also ask, or at least we ought to ask, the deeper question: to what subject should attention be directed? Or upon what object should attention be focused? In the text, the Jacobsons raise this question and point out the wide range of things that might be worthy of attention. Their examples include the natural world, of course, but also poetry, art, literature, hobbies, human persons, and many more. And beyond this question of what, the Christian pilgrim also must put into the practice the how of attentiveness. The answer? A posture of reverence. The exemplar described for that posture is the aforementioned Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring. What was she like, and what did she do? To start with, let's listen to her own words in this excerpt from the Jacobson's book, but which are from her book, The Sense of Wonder, where she described, which is not Silent Spring, different book, where she describes how she first introduced her son Roger to the mysteries of the sea on a dark and rainy night in Maine, when, quote, "Together we laughed for pure joy, he a baby meeting for the first time the wild tumult of Oceanus, I with the salt of half a lifetime of sea love in me. But I think we felt the same spine-tingling response to the vast roaring ocean and the wild night around us." 2 days later, they returned to hunt for ghost crabs under the moonlight. Quote, "For me, the sight of these small living creatures, solitary and fragile against the brute force of the sea, had moving philosophic overtones, and I do not pretend that Roger and I reacted with similar emotions. But it was good to see his infant acceptance of a world of elemental things, fearing neither the song of the wind, nor the darkness, nor the roaring surf." So who was she? She was one given over to surveilling the world attentively, curious, full of heart, joy, and life. But not only was she, as the text says, a first-class noticer, she was also a storyteller. Those of us predisposed to natural sciences tend to be moved and motivated by charts, tables, numbers, and data. You know, they bring us to tears. But ironically, in most cases, beliefs and behavior are immune to data. Just try convincing somebody of something on Facebook and you'll see what I mean. It slides off like rain on a Gore-Tex jacket. The data, it just slides off. People need stories, and part of practicing attentiveness is also being empathetic and connected, sometimes and usually most effectively through storytelling. People are moved by how they feel. And attentiveness must be connected to empathy, stories, and flourishing. It is deeply communal and deeply human. These concepts resonate again with the writings of Simone Weil. She describes the how of attentiveness as one, to see things as they are, which is what the text gets at. What is reality really like? As if we can know, but we try. To love beauty, and to pair observation with empathy and connectedness. See things as they are, listen and hear, look and see, take in and comprehend without rushing to interpret and explain. Data collection is painstaking and slow. We have to resist the impulse to infer and foreclose quickly. Be faithful to the data, I would tell my students. The biggest obstacle is usually oneself. And interestingly, on the poll, that inner thoughts was the one that came up as the highest. Attending in the way of looking at the world requires self-denial and self-discipline. Weil describes it as a form of pouring out, or kenosis, and in this way, a spiritual practice. Second, love beauty. Together we laughed for pure joy, said Carson. She noticed not only the presence, but also the absence of things when she noticed the absence of life in Silent Spring. She knew beauty, and she loved it enough to notice when it wasn't there. Finally, pair observation with connectedness. Carson had the ability to connect, to write and to make people feel, to share the beauty that she herself knew and saw. An important note from David Brooks for when attentiveness is directed at people rather than object is that it requires more than just observation, as if we could just look at other people as objects and observe them. We cannot. This has to be part of the attentiveness of reverence. It requires relationship and embodied by a quote, reciprocal and respectful interaction between two persons. Okay, I'm watching the time. There is another activity, but it's going to take a few minutes. So we started a little bit late. I'm looking at Luke. Okay, he wants me to be done in 7 minutes. Okay, the activity takes 3, so I think we'll try it. We'll see how this goes. Okay, I have recorded on, this is an excerpt from a podcast. It's the Ezra Klein Show, but he's interviewing a person who studies attentiveness. And this is a soundscape. We're going to listen to it 4 times. So let's see if the sound works. No, it's not coming through. It's only here. Check. Okay. If it doesn't come through, then we know we'll just move on. All good? It's okay. Okay. We're tight on time. I had another mentee ready to go with word clouds and everything, but alas, you just get to hear more of me, which is kind of a letdown, I'm sure. Okay, we'll skip through your mentee. All right, so lastly, attentiveness is surprising and risky. On a personal level, I reflect that attentiveness requires that we train ourselves out of anxiety. At least for me, that's the case. We need to train ourselves to sit. Well, I think rather than training ourselves out of anxiety, I would say we have to train ourselves to sit with the anxiety that comes from not knowing yet and from not foreclosing yet. My journey in this regard started in earnest as a college undergraduate at Westmont. Sorry, no Messiah, no Wheaton, Westmont for me. And it developed as much through the study of natural science as it did my study of theology. I still recall the impact of my freshman Christian doctrine class taught by Dr. Jonathan Wilson. For every lecture, he came in embodying a different kind of theologian. He showed up one day as a feminist theologian, another day as a liberation theologian, another as a Calvinist, another as an Anabaptist. The breadth of Christianity came alive. There is simply so much we don't know. Be secure enough to be surprised. Attentiveness requires being open to seeing anew, and that can be exciting. It can also be scary, and most certainly can be risky. Before Ernest Rutherford, I'm sure a household name for most of you, I'm being sarcastic because it's probably not, conducted his famous gold foil experiment, which demonstrated, importantly, that atoms are comprised of a small, dense nucleus surrounded mostly by empty space, but also with tiny electrons smeared across that space in difficult-to-predict ways. People, presumably British people, thought that atomic structure was like plum pudding, which is a kind of bready pudding dessert in which globs of fruit are here and there. Real attentiveness means that sometimes we're surprised. The atom's not like plum pudding. I totally lost you on this science joke. Are there any scientists in this room? Okay, would you know, all right, with the 6 of you, help me out. All right, they thought that the atoms were like plum pudding. Surprise, atoms aren't like plum pudding. You know, draw from the depths of your high school chemistry class when they told you that there's a nucleus and then there are electrons and there's a whole lot of empty space in between. That one was surprising, not particularly risky. I don't know anybody who lost their head over the non-plum pudding thing. Maybe people were just disappointed about their dessert, mostly British people. All right, I promise no more science jokes. I thought this was the funniest part of my talk. This clearly was not. Oh, Lord have mercy. All right, back to theology. How many theologians in this room? I feel like we're heavy on the, okay, yeah, well, all right, all right, no more science jokes. I'm moving on. Who set me up on this attentiveness pathway anyway? All right, the Jacobsons contrast the theology of Aquinas, which I'm just gonna out myself and say I just appreciate all his work he did on virtues, but they out Aquinas as being limited, and this is accurate, in his ability to hold the tension of the natural world with his strict systematic theological approach. The world had to obey what Aquinas had decided theology said it should. That's contrasted with the openness of Galileo to exploring the heavens. We all know how that turned out for Galileo. Wasn't good. Sometimes attentiveness, the courage and humility to remain open to the world, not being what you imagined it would be, includes considerable risk, especially when politics and power are involved. Well, there's learning here for those of us in Christian higher education. Christian higher ed is a place where all the insights and richness of religion, education, and aesthetics intersect, or at least they have the opportunity to intersect in Christian higher ed. There's great opportunity here to be attentive and to train students in attentiveness, to see what reality is really like, or the closest we can get to it, to teach students to sit with the anxiety and tension that comes with that. There's also risk. Many of our institutions in the CCCU are connected to denominations or boards that have the same struggles as Aquinas and church leaders in the time of Galileo. This is not to vilify those leaders. After all, I'm a provost. But rather, to name the tension that accompanies attentiveness, and to emphasize the importance of cultivating mental and personal postures, the how of attentiveness, not simply the what of attentiveness. So what is the how and not just the what? The virtues of attentiveness are summarized in the chapter, they include patience, humility, honesty, and courage. Patience to wait, as Simone Weil asserts, when you don't even yet know what you're waiting for. Humility that recognizes there is always more to learn. Honesty to see the object of your attentiveness as it really is, not as you want or imagine it to be. And the courage to be surprised. Christian endeavors, like the study of the natural world, writing poetry, prayer, reflection, faith and learning, and waiting for revelation are interwoven, and all require the virtues cultivated by attentiveness. In this way, pilgrims from a wide range of traditions share in the journey and in the conversation of seeing and knowing just a little bit more truth together along the way.